In the end, it was not the betrayal of his most trusted lieutenant, nor the collapse of 3 key financial pillars that defined his failure. It was the simple, quiet act of erasure. Adrian Volkov had spent 7 years building an empire on the bedrock of a woman's competence. And in a single evening, in a room full of his peers, he had spoken of that bedrock as if it were decorative sand. He had taken her work, her insight, her unwavering attention, and presented it as his own. The consequence was not loud. It was silent. It was absolute. It was the space where she used to be. The next morning, a senior partner from the Geneva Consortium, a man whose family had weathered empires and their falls, had called him, not to shout, not to threaten, but to deliver a diagnosis with the calm pity of a doctor confirming a terminal illness. 11 words, Adrian, the old man had said, his voice a dry rustle of paper and time. She sent me 11 words to undo a decade of our trust in you. You still don't know what they were, do you? He had not waited for an answer. The line went dead, leaving only the hum of a connection to nowhere. The chase was on, but Adrian did not yet understand he was the one being pursued, by a truth he had long ago dismissed. By the way, wherever in the world you're watching from right now, let me know in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories reach. Okay, where were we? The call had come and gone. The silence it left behind was heavier than the baccarat crystal tumbler in Adrian's hand. He stood in his penthouse, the city of sharp angles and borrowed light sprawling below him like a circuit board he was meant to control. The ice in his glass shifted, a miniature tectonic event. He was a man who managed events, who arranged outcomes, who curated reality. The Geneva Consortium was a cornerstone. Its withdrawal was not a crack in the foundation. It was the disappearance of the ground itself. 11 words. He turns the number over in his mind. It was a paltry count for such catastrophic effect. What could she possibly have said? Adrian Volkov is not the man you believe him to be? Too clumsy. His integrity is a carefully managed performance. Too philosophical. Alara was never clumsy or philosophical. She was precise. Her every action, every word, was weighed, measured, and deployed with the exactitude of a master jeweler setting a stone. He had last seen her 2 nights ago, at the annual summit of the Black Swan Council, a gathering of men like him, who moved capital and destinies with the same detached confidence. It was his moment of triumph. He had unveiled the Aegean strategy, a 10-year roadmap for navigating the turbulent waters of global finance, insulating their collective interests from the predictable chaos of nations. The strategy was intricate, prescient, a masterpiece of defensive architecture. He had stood at the polished lectern, the soft glow of the spotlights warming his face, and he had spoken. He had used the royal we when referring to his organization, but the singular I when detailing the strategy's conception. I saw the pattern, he had said. I anticipated the stress points. I designed the response. Alara had been there, standing near the back of the grand ballroom, by the tall, shadowed archway leading to the gardens. She wore a simple, dark dress, the kind that rendered her almost invisible against the room's opulent backdrop. He remembered catching her eye for a fraction of a second as he spoke. There was no expression on her face. Not anger, not disappointment, just a deep, unnerving stillness. The stillness of a seismograph needle just before the earthquake hits. He had mistaken her stillness for assent, for loyalty. He had confused her presence for her approval. It was a fatal miscalculation. He had not simply overlooked her contribution. He had negated her existence in the very architecture she had built. He had claimed the blueprints as his own. The next morning, she was gone. Her departure was not announced. There was no dramatic resignation, no tearful confrontation. There was only a small, cream-colored envelope left on the obsidian slab of his desk. Inside, a single sheet of matching paper. The note was not handwritten. It was typed in the simple, clean font she used for all internal communications. It said, "My services are concluded." That was it. 3 words. Colder and more final than any 2-week notice. He had read it and felt a flash of irritation. The timing was inconvenient, the tone impertinent. He had seen it as a problem to be managed, a negotiation tactic. He would give her a day to cool off, he had decided, then have his man Dmitri reach out with a generous offer. An apology, perhaps a significant raise, a gesture. He was good at gestures. They were the currency of his world, hollow tokens polished to a high sheen. But then the call from Geneva had come, and after that, another and another. The cascade began. Kenji Tanaka, the shipping magnate from Tokyo, rescinded a 20-year logistics pact with a terse 1-sentence email. The House of Al-Khoury in Dubai quietly froze a sovereign wealth fund transfer that was meant to anchor the Aegean strategy's first phase. Each withdrawal was swift, clean, and irreversible. Each message, whether spoken or written, carried the same ghostly echo: the loss of trust. The final call of the morning had been from a man named Silas Croft, a grizzled ex-MI6 officer who ran a private intelligence firm in London, a firm Adrian had on a multi-million-dollar retainer. Croft's loyalty was, by design, to the highest bidder. "Adrian," Croft had said, his voice gravelly, devoid of its usual mercenary cheer. "We're terminating our engagement." "On what grounds, Silas?" Adrian had demanded, his own voice tight with a control that was rapidly fraying. "Our contract is ironclad." There was a pause, long enough for Adrian to hear the distant sound of a London siren. "The contract was with your organization," Croft said finally. "But our guarantee of service, the part that isn't written down, the part that actually matters, that was with her. My people trusted her discretion. They trusted her word. She was the one who vetted every operative, who read every raw report, who knew which threats were real and which were noise. She was the signal, Adrian. You were just the speaker." He had hung up then, leaving Adrian standing in the center of his life, holding the receiver of a dead phone. She was the signal. You were just the speaker. The words landed like stones, each one cracking the carefully constructed facade of his identity. He had built an empire, yes, but he had not built it alone. He had managed it, but she had made it trustworthy. He had performed power, while she had quietly embodied it. And now she was gone. The signal had been cut, and all that was left was the speaker, broadcasting static into the void. He walked through the penthouse. It was a space designed to impress, filled with art he appreciated for its investment value, and furniture chosen for its severe, masculine lines. It was a stage set, and he had been playing the lead role for so long, he had forgotten he was acting. He moved from the living area to the long, gallery-like hallway that connected his private wing to her workspace. The door to her office suite, usually slightly ajar, was closed. He pushed it open. The air inside was different. Still. It smelled faintly of paper and lemon tea. For 7 years, this suite of 3 rooms had been the nerve center of his entire operation. From here, Alara had managed the intricate web of his legitimate and less than legitimate concerns. She had been his memory, his conscience, his gatekeeper. Now, The space was an echo chamber of her absence. The main office was Spartan. The large desk, usually covered in neat stacks of files and reports, was bare. The polished surface reflected the cool morning light from the window, a perfect, unbroken mirror. The computer terminal was dark. The chair was pushed in, perfectly aligned with the desk's edge. He ran his hand over the smooth, cold wood. No stray papers, no personal effects. He moved to the adjoining room, her personal study. The bookshelves that lined the walls, once groaning under the weight of legal texts, economic histories, and obscure philosophical treatises, were empty. Not just empty, they had been wiped clean. Not a speck of dust remaining in the voids where the books had been. The small Persian rug was gone. The single orchid she kept on the windowsill, its blossoms a shocking splash of magenta, was also gone. This was not the work of a person who had left in a hurry. This was a deliberate, methodical erasure. He went to the third room, a small, climate-controlled archive where she kept the physical records, the deeds, the contracts, the hard copies of everything that mattered. The rows of gray filing cabinets stood open, their drawers pulled out like empty mouths. Every file, every folder, every piece of paper had been removed. She had not just left, she had taken the entire history of his empire with her. He stood in the center of the empty archive, the full weight of his miscalculation finally settling upon him. This was not an act of pique. This was an act of war. A quiet, devastatingly effective one. She had not destroyed his empire. She had simply revealed that it was, and had always been, hers to begin with. She had built it on a foundation of trust she had cultivated personally, a currency he did not trade in and therefore did not value. Now she had cashed it all in and walked away, leaving him in a beautifully furnished, structurally unsound ruin. He thought back to the beginning, 7 years ago. Her father, Constantine, had been a mid-level player in the old world, a man who had mistaken luck for skill and found himself in a hole too deep to climb out of. The debt was to Adrian. It was substantial, unpayable. Constantine had come to him, a broken man reeking of desperation and expensive cologne. He had offered properties, favors, his own loyalty. Adrian had refused them all. They were liabilities. Then, Constantine had played his last card. "My daughter," he had said, the words catching in his throat. "Elara, she is remarkable. She sees things. She remembers everything. She just finished her studies in Zurich, economics, history. She speaks 4 languages. She is precise. Take her. Take her into your service, her time, her work, in exchange for the debt." Adrian had looked at the photograph Constantine pushed across the table, a young woman with dark, serious eyes and a face that held its thoughts close. She was not beautiful in the conventional, decorative way he was used to. There was an intelligence in her gaze that was almost unsettling. He saw her not as a person, but as an asset, a highly specialized tool. A mind like that, properly applied, could be invaluable. He had never been interested in owning people. It was messy, inefficient. But owning their time, their labor, their output, that was just good business. "For how long?" Adrian had asked. "As long as you deem the debt unpaid," Constantine had whispered, not meeting his eyes. And so, Elara had arrived. A quiet, self-contained young woman of 23, delivered to the steps of his empire as payment for her father's sins. She had not protested. She had not wept. She had simply entered his world and begun to learn its complex machinery. He had given her a small office and a series of meaningless tasks, tests of her ability and discretion. She completed them all without comment, flawlessly. He gave her more complex work, access to sensitive accounts, She organized them, streamlined them, found inefficiencies he had not known existed. Within a year, she was indispensable. Within 2, she was running the operational side of his entire world. He had arranged her life. A generous salary, paid into an account she never seemed to spend from. A beautiful apartment, which she had politely declined in favor of the modest suite of rooms at the top of his own headquarters. He had provided for her, managed her existence as he managed all his other assets. He had paid for her time. He had believed that was enough. He saw it now, with a clarity that felt like a physical blow. You can own a person's time, but you can never own their attention. Her attention was a gift she had given freely, to the work, to the principles of order and integrity that she held. And he, in his arrogance, had assumed that gift was for him. He walked back to his own office, the silence of her empty rooms following him. On his desk, next to the 3-word note, lay a single, heavy, old-fashioned brass key. It had not been there before. He picked it up. It was cold to the touch. There was no note attached, no explanation, just the key. It was not a key to any door in this building. He knew the security systems intimately. It was a clue, a starting point. She had not just vanished. She had laid a trail he was meant to follow. A trail designed not to lead him to her, but to lead him to the truth. The chase was not his to command, it was hers, and his only choice was to begin. The first step was to understand the key. It was ornate, heavy, with a complex bit that suggested a lock of significant age and craftsmanship. On the bow of the key, a small, barely perceptible engraving, a crest. A stylized goat, rampant, with a single star above its head. He did not recognize it. He summoned Dmitri, his chief lieutenant, the man he had been grooming for a decade to be his successor. Dmitri entered the office, his movements precise, his face a mask of controlled concern. He was tall, impeccably dressed, with the kind of reassuring calm that could soothe anxious investors and intimidate rivals. "Adrian," Dmitri said, his voice low. "I've been making calls. The damage is extensive, but I believe we can contain it." "Forget containment," Adrian said, holding up the key. "What is this?" Dmitri looked at the key, then at the crest. He frowned. "It looks like brass. Old." "I'm aware of its material composition, Dmitri. The crest. Do you recognize it?" Dmitri took a moment, a practiced hesitation that Adrian had always interpreted as thoughtfulness. "No, I can't say that I do. Where did this come from?" "She left it," Adrian said, watching his lieutenant's face for any flicker of recognition. There was none, only a well-rehearsed sympathy. "A final cryptic gesture," Dmitri murmured. "It's cruel. To wound you and then leave you with a puzzle." "It's not a puzzle," Adrian said, the realization dawning on him. "It's an address." He walked over to the large, leather-bound atlas he kept on a stand in the corner of his office, a relic from a time before digital maps. He opened it to the section on Switzerland. His finger traced the cantons, the small, fiercely independent regions. He had a feeling, a gut instinct honed by years of navigating treacherous deals. This was about money. Old money. He found the page for the canton of Graubünden, and there, in the corner, was the cantonal coat of arms. A rampant ibex. A goat. The key was not to a door. It was to a safe deposit box, and the crest was the sigil of a bank. A very specific, very old, very discreet bank in Zurich. One that did not advertise. One that did not have a website. A bank whose existence was a rumor, a legend among the world's financial elite. A bank that Alara, with her historian's mind and her archivist's obsession with detail, would have known about. And a bank where Adrian, despite his vast wealth, did not have an account. But someone else he knew did, the old man from the Geneva Consortium, the one who had delivered the wound line that morning. "Get the jet ready," Adrian said to Dmitri, closing the atlas with a soft thud. "We're going to Zurich." "We?" Dmitri asked, a flicker of surprise finally breaking through his composure. "Adrian, perhaps it's better if I go. You need to be here to manage the fallout." "The fallout is irrelevant until I understand the cause of the storm," Adrian said, his voice cold. "I am going, and you are coming with me. You've been my shadow for 10 years, Dmitri. It's time you saw the part of the world that operates without one." The flight to Zurich was tense and silent. Adrian spent the hours staring out the window of the Gulf Stream, watching the curvature of the earth as the sun set behind them. He replayed the past 7 years in his mind, searching for the moments he had missed, the signs he had ignored. He had seen Alara's competence as a resource to be exploited, her loyalty as something he was owed. He had never once asked her what she wanted, what she believed, who she was beyond the function she served in his life. He had managed her, but he had never tried to know her. He had arranged her world, but he had never communicated with her. The distinction, he was beginning to realize, was everything. Dmitri sat across from him, reviewing reports on a tablet, his face a study in focused diligence. Adrian watched him, a new, unsettling thought taking root. Dmitri had been his most trusted advisor. He had been the one to recommend tightening controls, increasing surveillance, consolidating power in the wake of minor betrayals over the years. He had always been the voice of caution, the advocate for a more ruthless, more insular operation. And Adrian had listened. He had followed Dmitri's advice, building higher and higher walls around his empire, until he was trapped inside with the one person who stood to gain the most from its collapse. When they landed in Zurich, a black, unmarked sedan was waiting on the tarmac. The driver was a man in his 60s, with a face that looked like it had been carved from alpine granite. He did not speak. He simply took Adrian's bag and held the door open. They drove in silence through the clean, orderly streets of the city, pulling up to a nondescript building of gray stone that could have been a university faculty or a minor government office. There was no sign, no nameplate, only a single heavy oak door. Adrian got out of the car. "Wait here," he told Dmitri. "Adrian, let me come with you," Dmitri insisted, his hand on the door handle. "This is an unknown quantity." "That's the point," Adrian said, turning to face him. "I need to go in alone. This is her message. It's for me." He walked to the door and inserted the brass key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying, well-oiled click. The door swung inward, revealing a small, wood-paneled antechamber. A man in a simple gray suit stood waiting for him. He was the custodian. "Mr. Volkov," the man said, his voice neutral. "We have been expecting you. Please, follow me." He led Adrian down a short hallway and into a small private room. The room contained only a table and 2 chairs. On the table was a single, sealed manila envelope. The first custodian gestured for Adrian to sit. "I am Herr Gerber," the man said. "I am the executor of a trust established by my client. The terms of the trust are simple. I was instructed to give you this envelope, provided you arrived alone and with the key she sent." He paused, his pale blue eyes assessing Adrian with a cool, dispassionate gaze. "My client was very specific about the alone part. She said you had a habit of bringing your own shadow to meetings, and that it was time you learned to face the light by yourself." The words were a direct quote, Adrian knew. He could hear Alara's precise, cutting voice in the banker's placid tone. "Your client," Adrian said. Is she here? My client's whereabouts are her own affair, Herr Gerber replied smoothly. My business is with the execution of her instructions. She was a remarkable steward of the funds she managed. For years, she used a portion of her considerable salary, which you paid her, to create a series of firewalls. Not for her own assets, but for the assets of smaller partners you were involved with. People who trusted you, but whom she knew you would sacrifice without a second thought if it suited your strategy. Gerber slid the envelope across the table. In here is a list of 3 accounts. Accounts belonging to small family businesses, artisans, innovators, people you were about to bankrupt as collateral damage in your Aegean strategy. She has made them whole, using her own money. The 11 words she sent to the Geneva Consortium were simple. He is about to liquidate the assets of the innocent. She knew they had a clause in their charter about protecting smaller partners, a clause you had forgotten but she had remembered. Adrian felt the blood drain from his face. It wasn't a betrayal, it was a moral calculation. She had not attacked him, she had protected others from him. She also left this for you, Gerber said, placing a second, smaller, sealed envelope on the table. It is the next step in your education, I believe she called it. She was quite clear that my assessment of your character would determine whether I gave it to you. She said I would know if you were merely angry or if you were beginning to understand. And what is your assessment, Herr Gerber? Adrian asked, his voice barely a whisper. The banker leaned forward slightly. For a man who has just lost control of his world, you are surprisingly quiet. You are listening. That is a start. He pushed the second envelope towards Adrian. The contents will lead you to your next appointment, in London. I would suggest you go alone. Your shadow is longer and darker than you think. Adrian took the envelope. He stood up, his legs feeling unsteady. Thank you, Herr Gerber. Do not thank me, the banker said, his face impassive. I have done nothing but my job. It is my client you should thank. She has given you a rare opportunity, Mr. Volkov. The chance to see yourself as others see you. Adrian walked out of the bank and into the cool Zurich air. The world looked different, sharper, more detailed. He saw the cracks in the pavement, the way the light reflected off the streetcar wires. He was seeing, for the first time in a long time, without the filter of his own importance. He got back into the car where Dmitri was waiting, his face a mask of anxious inquiry. What happened? What was in there? Dmitri asked, his voice urgent. Adrian looked at his lieutenant, his friend of 10 years, the man he had trusted above all others, and for the first time, he saw the faint, almost invisible lines of calculation around his eyes. He saw the hunger that he had always mistaken for ambition. It was nothing, Adrian said, settling back into the leather seat. A dead end, an old account of her father's. He tucked the sealed envelope from Gerber into his inside pocket. It seems she was just tying up loose ends. Let's go back to the hotel. We have an empire to rebuild. Dmitri relaxed, a subtle release of tension in his shoulders. Of course, Adrian. I knew it was a tantrum. We will fix this. We will be stronger than before. Yes, Adrian said, looking out the window as the car pulled away from the curb, leaving the gray stone building behind. We will build something new. But he was no longer sure what that meant, or who we included. The first lesson was complete. He had learned that his fortune was built on a moral foundation he had not laid and did not understand. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the lessons were only going to get harder from here. Back in the sterile luxury of the hotel suite, Adrian waited until Dmitri had retired to his adjoining room. The pretense of normalcy was a strain, a thin veneer of glass over a widening chasm of doubt. He had played the part of the frustrated but resolute leader, discussing strategies with Dmitri for shoring up their crumbling alliances. He had listened to Dmitri's calm, logical suggestions, each one aimed at further isolating their operation, cutting off weaker partners, and consolidating control. Every word of advice now sounded like a chapter in a manual for a coup. Isolate the target, cut off his support, make him dependent on you alone. Once he was certain he was alone, Adrian retrieved the second envelope from his jacket. The paper was heavy, expensive, with the watermark of a prestigious London law firm. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed address in Mayfair and a time for the following afternoon. There was also a small folded note, this one handwritten in Alara's small, neat architectural script. It was the first personal communication he had received from her, and his heart hammered against his ribs as he unfolded it. The note was not an explanation or an appeal. It was an instruction. Do not show this to anyone. Do not speak of it. Do not bring anyone with you. If Dmitri is with you when you read this, your next task is to get rid of him. Send him on a fool's errand. Tell him you need him to fly to Hong Kong to personally reassure Mr. Lee. Tell him only he can be trusted with such a delicate mission. Use his vanity against him. It is his weakest point. Your ability to follow this simple instruction will determine if the next door opens for you. Adrian read the note 3 times. The cold precision of it was breathtaking. She was not just leading him, she was testing him at every step. She had anticipated that he would bring Dmitri. She had anticipated Dmitri's feigned concern, and she had provided the exact tool to solve the problem. Use his vanity against him. It was a surgical strike at the core of Dmitri's character. He sat for a long time, the note in his hand, the plan forming in his mind. It was a risk. Sending Dmitri away would leave him exposed, but keeping him close was clearly a greater danger. Alara was teaching him a new kind of strategy, one based not on overwhelming force, but on precise psychological leverage. The next morning, he summoned Dmitri to his suite. He had artfully scattered documents related to their Hong Kong operations on the coffee table. He looked tired, stressed, the picture of a man overwhelmed. "Dmitri," he began, his voice heavy with manufactured weariness. "I've been up all night. Zurich was a waste of time, a distraction. The real threat is in the east. I just got off a call with Lee's office. He's wavering. He's hearing whispers." Dmitri's expression sharpened. "What kind of whispers?" "The kind that say we're finished," Adrian said, running a hand through his hair. "That our structure is compromised. He needs reassurance, Dmitri. Not from an email or a video call. He needs to see one of us. He needs to see our strength." Dmitri's posture straightened. He was already seeing himself on the corporate jet, the fate of the Eastern Hemisphere in his capable hands. "I agree. I will draft a communiqué for his board at once." "No," Adrian said, standing up and walking to the window. "A communiqué is not enough. They need to see a face, my face. But I cannot be in 2 places at once, and with things so fragile in Europe." He let the sentence hang in the air. He turned to face Dmitri, letting a look of calculated desperation show. "I need you to go, Dmitri. I know it's a huge ask, but you are the only one I trust to handle this. You know the nuances of our relationship with Lee better than I do. You negotiated the original terms. He respects you." The bait was taken. Dmitri's eyes gleamed with a mixture of pride and resolve. "Of course, Adrian. Consider it done. I will leave immediately. I will not return until Lee's loyalty is secured beyond any doubt." "Thank you, Dmitri," Adrian said, clapping him on the shoulder. The gesture felt hollow. a pantomime of a trust that no longer existed. You are more than my lieutenant. You are my brother. As he watched Dimitri leave, full of purpose and self-importance, Adrian felt a profound sense of loneliness. He had successfully followed Alara's instructions. He had passed the test. But in doing so, he had confirmed his own isolation. He was truly alone now, navigating a world of shadows with only the cryptic guidance of the woman he had driven away. An hour later, he was on a commercial flight to London, seated in an anonymous business class seat, a man among many. The anonymity was unsettling at first, then strangely liberating. No one knew who he was. No one deferred to him. He was just a man in a suit, flying to a meeting. For the first time in years, he was not performing. He was simply being. The address in Mayfair led him to a quiet, elegant square lined with pristine Georgian townhouses. The firm was discreet, its name etched on a small brass plaque next to a glossy black door. He was shown into a library, a room that smelled of old leather, beeswax, and paper. Floor-to-ceiling shelves were filled with leather-bound books, not for show, but for use. They were worn, some with cracked spines, markers sticking out of them. A woman was standing by the fireplace, her back to him, examining a small framed manuscript on the mantelpiece. She was tall, with a cascade of silver hair pinned loosely at the nape of her neck. She wore a simple but exquisitely cut tweed jacket. She was the second custodian. "Dr. Alistair," Adrian said, announcing his presence. The name had been on the letterhead. She turned, and her eyes, a startlingly clear shade of blue, met his. She looked to be in her late 60s, with a face that showed intelligence and a distinct lack of patience for fools. "Mr. Volkov, you're punctual. Alara said you would be. She said you appreciate the aesthetics of efficiency, even if you sometimes miss the substance." The polite sting of the comment was pure Alara. "You know Alara?" he asked. "Know her?" "Doctor." Alistair gave a dry chuckle. "My dear man, I taught her. She was my most brilliant student at Oxford before she transferred to Zurich. Her thesis on the use of art as a soft power asset in post-war reconstruction was groundbreaking. I tried to keep her in academia. It was a great loss to the field when she went into private enterprise." She gestured to a chair. "Please, sit." Adrian sat, feeling like a student called into the headmistress's office. "She contacted me about a month ago," Dr. Alistair continued, taking the chair opposite him. "She asked for my help on a small project, evaluation. She had, over the years, on your behalf, helped you acquire a number of significant, though discreet, pieces of art. Small paintings, rare manuscripts, antiquities. You saw them as investments, items to be stored in a climate-controlled vault in Geneva. You appreciated their rising monetary value." "They were part of a diversified portfolio," Adrian said, the defensive words sounding hollow even to himself. "Indeed, Doctor," Alistair said, her tone laced with irony. But Alara understood their true value. She knew the history of each piece. She knew who had owned them, who coveted them. She understood that these were not just assets. They were keys. Keys to unlock doors, to build relationships, to communicate in a language that transcends spreadsheets and contracts. She leaned forward. "For the past 7 years, Alara has been quietly lending these pieces out, not selling them, lending them, to a small museum in Kyoto that needed a centerpiece for a fundraiser, to a scholar in Florence who needed to study a particular manuscript, to a cultural institute in Cairo trying to rebuild its collection. She did this all under your name, Mr. Volkov. In the quiet, influential world of cultural diplomacy, you have become known as a great, if eccentric, philanthropist, a man of taste and generosity. This reputation, which she built for you, has granted you access and influence in circles you didn't even know existed. It is a significant part of the goodwill that underpins your entire enterprise. Adrian was stunned into silence. He had seen the line items for curation and transport on the quarterly reports. He had approved them without a thought, assuming it was the cost of maintaining his collection. He had no idea. The problem, Dr. Allister continued, her voice hardening slightly, is the Aegean strategy, your plan to consolidate and insulate your interests. As part of that plan, you had ordered the recall and liquidation of the entire collection, to be sold at auction, a fire sale to fund your fortress. You were about to destroy 7 years of her most careful, most delicate work. You were about to brand yourself not as a philanthropist, but as a barbarian. She couldn't allow that. So she had acted. She had called in the favors. The museum directors, the scholars, the cultural ministers, people who sat on the boards of banks and multinational corporations, people who owed their success in some small part to the generosity of the mysterious Mr. Volkov. She had told them the truth, and they had chosen to stand with the person who understood the value of a 15th century manuscript, not the one who only understood its price. She saw the beauty, Adrian said, the words coming out before he could stop them. I only saw the numbers. Doctor, Alistair's expression softened for a moment. Precisely. She has a gift for seeing the true nature of things, a gift you mistook for a clerical skill. She reached into a drawer in the small table beside her and pulled out a small, flat, cloth-wrapped package tied with a simple string. She asked me to give you this, but only if I thought you had grasped the lesson. And have I? You've stopped defending yourself, she said. That's a promising sign. You've started to ask questions instead of issuing orders. She handed him the package. This was her favorite piece from your collection, a small, illuminated page from a medieval book of hours. It depicts St. Jerome in his study, with the lion at his feet, a symbol of taming one's own powerful, beastly nature to serve a higher purpose. She said you would understand its relevance. Adrian took the package. It was light in his hands. Where is she? She is where she needs to be, Doctor, Allister said, standing up, signaling the end of the meeting. This package contains the key to your next meeting. Not a physical key this time, a piece of information, a name. Alara believes in layers of meaning, Mr. Volkov. She believes that truth is not a thing to be seized, but a thing to be revealed, layer by painstaking layer. I hope for your sake that you have the patience to see it through. He thanked her and left, the small package feeling impossibly heavy in his coat pocket. He walked through the London streets, not seeing the crowds or the traffic. He was seeing his life's work through a new lens. An empire built not just on finance and logistics, but on quiet acts of generosity, on cultural capital he had not even known he possessed. An empire he had almost destroyed out of sheer, profound ignorance. He found a quiet bench in a small park and unwrapped the package. The illuminated manuscript was exquisite. The colors were still vibrant after 600 years. He saw the figure of the saint, bent over his books, and the powerful lion lying peacefully at his feet, its wildness not broken but submitted, tamed. He looked closer at the intricate border of the page. Woven into the foliage, so small it was almost invisible, was a name, written in what looked like modern ink, in Alara's precise hand. Constantine, her father's name, and below it, an address. Not in a glamorous city or a financial capital. an address in a small, forgotten town on the coast of Romania. This was the next step, a meeting with the man who had started it all, the man who had sold his daughter to clear his debt. Adrian felt a cold knot of dread form in his stomach. The first 2 lessons had been intellectual, about his business. He had a feeling the third lesson would be about his soul. He looked at the manuscript again. Saint Jerome, Taming the Lion. He had always seen himself as the lion. He was beginning to suspect he was the one who needed taming. The journey to Romania was a descent. He left the world of private jets and 5-star hotels behind, trading them for commercial flights with crying babies, rental cars with sticky steering wheels, and towns where the ghosts of a brutal history lingered in the crumbling concrete facades. He traveled under a false name, a precaution Alara would have expected. The process was humbling, stripping away the layers of privilege that had insulated him from the world. He was no longer Adrian Volkov, the architect of destinies. He was just a man, tired and anxious, following a map drawn by someone else. The town was a bleak collection of houses huddled against the gray expanse of the Black Sea. The address led him not to a private residence, but to a state-run care facility, a long, low building that smelled of disinfectant and despair. His heart sank. He had imagined a confrontation, a heated exchange with the man who had committed the original sin of this long, complicated story. He had not prepared himself for this. He gave the name, Constantine Petrescu, to the tired-looking woman at the front desk. She checked a ledger and directed him down a long, linoleum-floored corridor. The air was thick with the sounds of daytime television and quiet, persistent coughing. He found the room at the end of the hall. The door was ajar. He pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was small, clean, and bare. A single bed, a small wardrobe, a chair. And by the window, looking out at the churning sea, a man sat in a wheelchair. It was Constantine, but it was not the man Adrian remembered. The proud, desperate man in the expensive, ill-fitting suit was gone. This man was shrunken, frail, his hair white and thin. A coarse gray blanket was tucked around his legs. He did not turn as Adrian entered. "She said you would come," Constantine said, his voice a dry, papery rustle. He spoke in Romanian, a language Adrian understood but rarely used. "She said you were a man who could not leave a puzzle unsolved." Adrian stood by the door, unsure what to do, what to say. The anger he had been nursing for 7 years, the contempt for this man who had sold his own child, evaporated in the face of this broken figure. "Alara," Adrian said, his own voice sounding rough. Have you seen her?" Constantine finally turned his head. His eyes, the same dark, intelligent eyes as his daughter, were clouded with a deep, settled sadness. "I have not seen my Alara in 7 years, not since the day I sent her to you. It was her condition. She would do what I asked. She would pay my debt with her life, her time, but she would never see me again. It was a fair price for what I did." He coughed, a dry, racking sound that shook his small frame. "You see a pathetic old man in a chair, yes? This is her mercy. After my deal with you, my luck did not improve. My other associates were not as patient as you. They took everything. My business, my home. They broke my legs to make a point. I was left on the street. I thought I would die there." He took a sip of water from a plastic cup on the table beside him. "And then, one day, a lawyer found me, a man from Bucharest. He told me an anonymous benefactor had arranged for my care, a clean place to live, doctors, food, a small pension, enough for cigarettes and dignity. He said the benefactor only asked that I live quietly and not seek to discover their identity. But I knew. Of course I knew. It was her. Adrian felt a profound, dizzying sense of vertigo. He had to lean against the doorframe to steady himself. Alara, who had every right to hate her father, to forget him, had instead reached back from the world he had thrown her into and saved him. She had protected the man who had failed to protect her. The quiet, anonymous protection of the innocent, even when the innocent was guilty. She has been sending money every month for 5 years, Constantine continued, his voice thick with a shame that was almost holy. More than I deserve. And she writes to me. Not letters, just instructions. She knew my old connections, the people I knew in the old country. She would ask me to find things. A birth certificate from a burned-down village. A property deed from before the wars. Small, forgotten pieces of paper. I became her archivist in this place of forgetting. He gestured to a small, locked metal box under his bed. She was building something, a case, against a man inside your own house. A man she said was a wolf dressed as a sheepdog. She did not trust the digital world. She said it was too easy to alter, to erase. She wanted paper. She wanted proof that could be held in your hand. This was it, the hidden archive. Not in a Swiss vault or a London law firm, but here, in this sad little room guarded by a broken old man. The man, Adrian said, his throat tight. Did she name him? Dmitri, Constantine said, the name a venomous hiss. She said he was patient, that he had been stealing from you for years in small, untraceable ways. But recently he had become bold. He was planning to take everything, to leave you with nothing, just as I was left with nothing. She said Dmitri reminded her of me in my worst days, a man who smiled and was a villain. Constantine reached under his pillow and pulled out a small, simple key, the key to the metal box. She told me to give this to you, but only if you came here yourself, only if you saw this. He gestured to his withered legs, to the bleak room, to the gray sea outside. She wanted you to see the consequence of a man's pride, my pride, and perhaps your own. He held the key out to Adrian. His hand trembled. Adrian walked forward and took the key. His fingers brushed against Constantine's. The old man's skin was as thin as paper. She is a good daughter, Constantine whispered, tears welling in his clouded eyes. Better than I deserved. Yes, Adrian said, his voice choked. She is. He unlocked the metal box. It was filled with meticulously organized files. Each file contained original documents, notarized affidavits, bank statements from obscure offshore accounts, shipping manifests, phone records. It was a complete and irrefutable record of Dmitri's long-running betrayal. He had been building a shadow empire within Adrian's, siphoning off funds, creating shell corporations, and making secret deals with Adrian's enemies. The evidence was overwhelming, painstakingly gathered over years, piece by painful piece, by a man in a wheelchair in a forgotten corner of the world, at the direction of the woman they had both wronged. The archive detailed a betrayal so profound, so patient, it was almost a work of art. Dmitri had not just been stealing money. He had been replacing key personnel with his own loyalists. He had been subtly sabotaging deals to make Adrian seem erratic and unstable. He had been poisoning relationships, whispering doubts, positioning himself as the calm, reasonable alternative. The Aegean strategy, Adrian now realized, had been Dmitri's masterstroke. It was a plan designed to fail, to concentrate all of Adrian's assets into a structure that Dmitri, and Dmitri alone, held the keys to. Alara's departure had not been the cause of the crisis. It had been a preemptive strike to stop Dmitri's final move. Adrian sat on the floor of the small room, the files spread around him, the scale of Alara's quiet war laid bare. She had not left him. She had been fighting for him, from the shadows, in a way he could never have conceived. She had used the very people he had dismissed, a principled banker, a discerning academic, a broken father, as her generals. She had built an army of quiet competence to fight an enemy he had not even seen. He looked up at Constantine, who was watching him with those sad, knowing eyes. "What now?" Adrian asked, not as a commander, but as a student. "Now, you use the truth," Constantine said. "It is the one weapon a man like Dmitri cannot defend against. She said you would know what to do. She trusts your mind for strategy. She was just trying to fix your heart so you would aim it at the right target." Adrian gathered the files, his hands moving with a new, determined purpose. He looked at the frail man in the wheelchair. "I will see that you are moved to a better facility, a private clinic in Switzerland, the best doctors." Constantine shook his head. "No. This is my penance, and it is safe here. Dimitri's reach is long. You must not think of me. You must think of her. She has put herself in great danger to do this. Find her. Protect her. It is the only way you can repay the debt. Not my debt to you, your debt to her." Adrian nodded, a lump forming in his throat. He placed a hand on the old man's shoulder. "Thank you." He left the care facility and walked towards the sea, the heavy box of evidence in his hands. The wind was cold, sharp, smelling of salt and decay. He stood on the shore, looking out at the endless gray water, and for the first time, he felt the true weight of what he had to do. This was no longer about rebuilding his empire. It was about earning the trust of the one person who had ever truly seen him, and who had offered him a chance, at great personal cost, to see himself. The fourth custodian, he now understood, was him. He held the evidence and the responsibility that came with it. The next step was not to find a clue, it was to become the solution. The final file in the box was different. It was not a record of Dimitri's treachery. It was a single, thin envelope with Adrian's name on it, written in Alara's hand. He opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was not a letter, but a train ticket. A ticket for a sleeper car on the Orient Express, departing from Bucharest the following night. The destination was Venice, and tucked behind the ticket was a small, folded piece of paper. On it, a single sentence. "If you have come this far, you are ready to listen." It was an invitation, the end of the trail. He spent the next 24 hours in a state of heightened, focused activity. He found a secure local law office in a nearby city and, using a satellite phone he had brought for emergencies, began the process of scanning and digitally securing every document from Constantine's box. He created multiple encrypted backups, uploading them to secure servers in different jurisdictions, a trick he had learned from Alara herself. He worked through the night, fueled by black coffee and a cold, clarifying anger. The betrayal was one thing. He had dealt with traitors before. But the patience of it, the sheer, meticulous evil of Dimitri's long game was staggering. And more staggering still was the quiet, heroic counterintelligence campaign waged by Alara. As he worked, he instructed his loyal fixer, Silas Croft's more discreet replacement, a man known only as the Ghost, to do two things. First, to create a new, untraceable identity for Constantine Petrescu and arrange for his immediate, clandestine transfer to a secure, private medical facility in Austria, with a full staff and a dedicated security detail. He would honor the old man's wish for penance, but he would not leave him exposed. Second, he tasked the Ghost with locating Dmitri. Not to apprehend him, but to track him. He wanted to know every call he made, every person he met. He was hunting a snake, and he needed to know the shape of its nest before he struck. He boarded the train in Bucharest just before midnight, a different man from the one who had arrived in Romania. He was leaner, harder, the artifice of his old life stripped away. He had the box of original documents in a battered leather satchel chained to his wrist. He found his compartment, a small, wood-paneled jewel box of a room, and locked the door behind him. The train pulled out of the station with a gentle lurch, the city lights giving way to the dark, rolling countryside. He did not sleep. He sat by the window, watching the moonlit landscape slide by, and he thought. He reread Alara's notes, the ones from the custodians, the final invitation. If you have come this far, you are ready to listen. Listening was not a skill he had ever cultivated. He was a man of pronouncements, of directives. But the journey had changed him. He had been forced to listen to the banker, the academic, the broken father. He had been forced to listen to the silence in Alara's empty rooms. He was beginning to understand that power was not about speaking. It was about knowing what was not being said. The next day, as the train wound its way through the mountains of Slovenia and into the plains of Italy, a report came through on his encrypted device from the ghost. Dmitri was not in Hong Kong. He had never intended to go. The fool's errand had been seen for what it was. Dmitri had flown from Zurich to a private airfield outside Moscow. He was meeting with the one man Adrian had always considered his ultimate rival, a brutal oligarch named Ivan Morozov. The evidence was clear. Dmitri was not just trying to usurp Adrian's empire. He was planning to sell it to his greatest enemy. The timeline had just accelerated dramatically. Adrian felt a surge of cold panic, quickly suppressed. Alara had taught him better than that. Panic was a luxury. He needed to think. What was Dmitri's play? He was making his move openly now. That meant he believed Adrian was neutralized, lost on a wild goose chase. It meant the final phase of his plan was imminent. The train arrived in Venice at dusk. The city was a dream, rising from the water, its impossible beauty a stark contrast to the ugliness of the situation. As he stepped off the train onto the platform at Santa Lucia station, he felt a sense of profound unreality. He scanned the crowd, his senses on high alert. He was expecting a contact, a sign. He saw nothing. He walked out of the station to the edge of the Grand Canal. The air was cool, smelling of salt water and history. Vaporettos and water taxis crisscrossed the shimmering waterway. And then he saw her. She was not waiting for him. She was standing alone on the far side of the Ponte degli Scalzi, the bridge just outside the station. She was leaning against the stone balustrade, looking out at the water, her back to him. She was wearing a simple trench coat, her hair tied back. She looked thinner than he remembered, and there was a weariness in her posture that he had never seen before. But it was her. He started walking towards the bridge, his heart pounding. The satchel banged against his leg. He felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to run to her, to tell her everything, to apologize, to thank her. But he checked himself. Her note had said, "You are ready to listen." So he would listen. He walked up the steps of the bridge and stopped a few feet behind her. He said her name just once. Alara. She did not turn around immediately. She took a deep breath, her shoulders rising and falling. Then she slowly turned to face him. Her face was pale in the fading light. Her dark eyes were huge, and they held a universe of exhaustion, pain, and a guarded, fragile hope. "Adrian," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried across the small space between them, cutting through the noise of the city. "You came." "You knew I would," he said. I hoped you would, she corrected him gently. There is a difference. They stood there for a long moment, the water flowing beneath them, the city holding its breath around them. The power dynamic, for the first time in their 7 years, was perfectly, terrifyingly balanced. He was the man with the global empire, the private jets, the armies of lawyers and fixers. She was the woman with a train ticket and a moral compass. And in that moment, he knew, without a doubt, who was the more powerful. Dmitri is in Moscow, he said, breaking the silence. He's with Morozov. She nodded, unsurprised. I know. He made his move an hour ago. He has initiated a systemic lockdown of our core financial structures. He's using an emergency protocol that you and he designed. A protocol that requires 2 key holders to activate, but has a failsafe that allows a single key holder to act if the other is incapacitated. He has declared you incapacitated, mentally unstable. He has presented your recent travels as proof of a breakdown. Adrian felt the world tilt. How can he do that? It requires board approval, a vote. He has the votes, Alara said, her voice flat. The people he has been placing for years. And he has Morozov's backing. By morning, the financial authorities in 3 countries will have recognized his control. You will be locked out. Officially. Legally. This was the endgame. A checkmate he had never seen coming. So it's over, he said, the words tasting like ash. No, she said, and for the first time, a spark of the old fire returned to her eyes. It's not over. He has made a critical error. He has underestimated us. He thinks he is fighting you, the man he knew, the man who valued control over connection, the man who wouldn't see the truth even when it was in a box chained to his wrist. She glanced at the satchel. But he is not fighting that man anymore, is he? She took a step closer. Dimitri's plan is built on a lie. The lie that your empire is a fortress. But I know the truth. It's a network. And it's held together not by contracts and protocols, but by trust. A trust that he has never had, and that you are only just beginning to earn. She looked at him, her gaze intense, searching. Dimitri thinks he is in a race to seize control. He is wrong. We are in a race to tell the truth. He has about a 12-hour head start. He thinks that's an insurmountable lead. But his path is built on lies, which are heavy and slow. Our path is built on truth, which is light and fast. The question, Adrian, is, are you ready to run? In her eyes, he did not see forgiveness. He did not see affection. He saw a partner, an equal, offering not a second chance, but a single, final opportunity to build something new, together, from the ruins of what he had so carelessly broken. What do we do? He asked. And in that simple question, he seated the command he had held for so long. He was finally, truly, ready to listen. Ilara's plan was not a counterattack. It was an act of radical transparency. It was as elegant and ruthless as she was. Dimitri is trying to seize a castle, she explained, as they sat in a quiet, dark corner of a small bacaro, the kind of local place no tourist would ever find. He thinks power resides in the throne room. He's wrong. Power resides in the villages, with the people who supply the castle. We're not going to storm the gates. We're going to inform the villages. For the next 3 hours, they worked. It was a symphony of quiet, focused action. Adrian, for the first time, felt like an apprentice. Alara was the conductor. She had a list, not of their most powerful allies, but of their most pivotal. The quiet ones, the overlooked ones, the wavering allies, whose votes Dimitri thought he had secured through threats and promises. We don't start at the top, she said, pushing a list of names across the small marble table. "We start with the nodes, the people who connect other people. We don't need to convince everyone. We just need to convince the right four." The first call was to a woman named Anya Sharma in Mumbai, a fintech innovator whose small company managed the secure communications for half of Adrian's network. Dimitri had tried to acquire her company a year ago. Adrian had, on Dimitri's advice, dismissed her as insignificant. Alara had secretly funded her last 2 rounds of development. Adrian made the call. He did not command, he did not demand. He explained. He laid out Dimitri's betrayal and his own blindness. He told her about Alara's quiet protection of her firm. He was honest, direct, and humbled. He did not ask for her loyalty. He asked for her help. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Alara called me an hour ago," Anya Sharma said finally. "She told me you would be calling. She said to listen to you, and then to make my own decision. She said you were learning a new language. It seems you are a fast learner, Mr. Volkov." She paused. "Dimitri's lockdown protocol is running through my servers. I can't stop it, but I can delay it. I can introduce a systems integrity check that will slow the data cascade by 90%. It will buy you 6 hours. Use them well." 6 hours. It was a lifetime. The second call was to Silas Croft in London, the ex-MI6 man. Adrian had been his client. Alara had been his trusted source. "Silas," Adrian said once he was on the line, "I need your help, not as a client, as a colleague." "I'm listening," Croft said, his voice wary. Adrian explained the situation with Dimitri and Morozov. "Dimitri thinks this is a financial coup. It's not. It's a geopolitical move. Morozov isn't just backing Dimitri. He's using him to gain access to our entire intelligence network. The data you and your people have gathered for a decade." "Our contract was terminated, Adrian," Croft said coldly. "This isn't about a contract," Adrian shot back, the passion rising in his voice. "This is about your network, your people, their sources, their families. Alara built firewalls to protect them, but Dimitri is going to hand Morozov the keys. You know what Morozov does to people he considers threats. This isn't business, it's a slaughter." Another silence, longer this time. "Alara vouched for you," Croft said, his voice low. "She said you had changed. I didn't believe her. The information about Morozov's involvement, is it verified?" "I have the proof," Adrian said, tapping the satchel. "I will send it to you right now." "Do it," Croft said. "If what you say is true, Morozov has been a ghost for years. If we can get a location on him through Dimitri, we can activate certain jurisdictional protocols, international warrants, things that are very difficult to bury, even for a man like Morozov." The third call was to the old man in Geneva, the one who had delivered the wound line. Adrian explained, simply and without embellishment, the full scope of Dimitri's fraud and his own complicity of ignorance. He told him about the accounts Alara had saved. He told him about the art she had used to build goodwill. He laid himself bare. "We are convening an emergency vote of the council in 2 hours," the old man said. "Dimitri has presented a compelling case for your removal. He has letters from doctors, affidavits. It is all very thorough." "It's all a lie," Adrian said. "Lies can be very powerful when they are well documented," the banker replied. "What do you have to counter it?" "I have the truth," Adrian said. "And I have Alara." "Ah, yes," the old man said, and for the first time there was a hint of warmth in his voice. "The signal. Very well, send us what you have. We will weigh it. But I will tell you this, Adrian. Your only hope is that enough members of this council remember that trust is not a number on a balance sheet." The final call was the hardest. It was to Kenji Tanaka in Tokyo, the shipping magnate. He was a man of tradition, of honor. Adrian's earlier dismissal of Alara's work had been a profound insult to him, as it was Alara who had personally nursed Tanaka's dying wife's foundation, ensuring its legacy. This time, Alara spoke first, in fluent, formal Japanese. She explained the situation briefly, her tone respectful but firm. Then she handed the phone to Adrian. "Tanaka-san," Adrian began, his own voice faltering for a moment. "I have no right to ask you for anything. My actions at the summit were dishonorable. I broke faith with you, and with the memory of your wife. I cannot undo that insult. I can only try to atone for it. Dimitri is attempting to seize control of the network. If he succeeds, the first thing he will do is dissolve the charitable foundations we support, including your wife's. He sees them as a drain on resources. I am asking you not to help me, but to help me protect her legacy." He held his breath. The silence stretched for an eternity. Finally, Tanaka's voice came, heavy with emotion. "My wife always said Alada-san had the heart of a true samurai. She saw duty not as a burden, but as a privilege. It seems some of her spirit has finally rubbed off on you, Volkov-san. Dimitri has asked for my proxy vote. He will not have it." They hung up. The 4 pillars had been secured. Ilata looked at Adrian, her face unreadable in the dim light. "It may not be enough," she said. "It has to be," he replied. As if on cue, Adrian's encrypted device buzzed. It was a message from the Ghost. "Asset located. Dimitri is not in Moscow. He is on Morozov's yacht, the St. George, currently in neutral waters in the Adriatic. But there's a complication. It's not just Dimitri and Morozov. They have a guest. Your man from Hong Kong, Mr. Lee." Adrian showed the message to Ilata. Her face went pale. "Lee is the kingmaker," she whispered. "If Dimitri has him, he has the entire Asian bloc. We're too late." But Adrian was already shaking his head. A new, cold clarity was settling over him. "No, this is Dimitri's mistake. This is his vanity." He looked at Alara, his eyes blazing with a newfound fire. He didn't just want to win. He wanted Lee to see him win. He wanted to parade his victory in front of the man he could never quite impress. He brought all his enemies to the same place. He thinks it's his coronation. But he's just built his own prison. Suddenly, Dimitri did the unexpected. A new message flashed across the dark web channels that the financial world used for rumor and speculation. It was a broadcast from Morozov's yacht. Dimitri, flanked by a grim-faced Lee, announced that he had taken control of Adrian's organization to stabilize it after its founder's tragic mental decline. He announced an immediate partnership with Morozov's conglomerate, a move that would effectively create the largest, most powerful dark financial entity in the world. He was not hiding. He was gloating. He was daring anyone to stop him. It was a lateral surprise, a move of shocking audacity. He wasn't just seizing power. He was trying to merge the empire with its greatest rival, creating a fait accompli. "He's forcing their hand," Alara said, her voice tight. "He's creating a situation so large and dangerous that the authorities will have to accept it. They won't risk destabilizing the global markets by fighting it." "He's wrong," Adrian said. He was already on his feet, pacing the small room. The clock was ticking. Anya Sharma's 6 hours were almost up. The Geneva Council was about to vote. He had to outthink Dimitri, not outfight him. He began a new series of calls, not to his allies, but to the regulators. The SEC, the FCA in Britain, the BaFin in Germany. He used his real name. He announced his location. He sent them the entire, unredacted archive of Dimitri's crimes. The fraud, the theft, the shell corporations. But he did one more thing. a move born of Alara's playbook. He attached a file she had prepared months ago, a detailed analysis of how Dmitry and Morozov's merger would create a systemic risk so catastrophic it would trigger a global financial meltdown within weeks. She had modeled it, predicted it, and laid it out in the dry, terrifying language of risk assessment that regulators understood. He was not asking them to save him. He was giving them the ammunition to save themselves. Then he called Silas Croft. "Where's the yacht, Silas?" "Exactly." Croft gave him the coordinates. The yacht was just inside the edge of Italian territorial waters. "They got sloppy," Croft said. "Drifted a few nautical miles while they were celebrating." "That's all we need," Adrian said. He hung up and made his final call to the Italian Guardia di Finanza, the financial police. He spoke to the commander, a man he had never met, but whose file Alara had insisted he memorize years ago. A man known for his incorruptibility and his hatred of Russian oligarchs. Adrian told him everything. He gave him the coordinates. He gave him the warrant number from Croft's international protocol. He gave him proof of massive, ongoing financial crime happening in his jurisdiction. Then they waited. The hours stretched. The cafe grew quiet. The owner began putting chairs up on the tables. Adrian and Alara sat in silence, the empty coffee cups between them. They had done everything they could. The rest was in the hands of the systems they had set in motion. Just before dawn, the messages began to flood in. The Geneva Council had voted. It was a tie. But the chairman, the old banker, had cast the deciding vote in favor of Adrian. His reasoning, leaked to the press, was simple. Between a man who admits his blindness and a man who pretends to have perfect vision, I will always trust the one who knows he cannot see. Anya Sharma messaged. She had held the cascade. Dimitri's lockdown had failed. And then, a news alert from Reuters. Italian authorities have boarded the yacht St. George in the Adriatic. Arrests have been made in connection with an international fraud investigation. Among those detained are Russian national Ivan Morozov and his associate Dmitry Volkov. The report mentioned that a key witness, a prominent Hong Kong businessman, was cooperating with authorities. Lee had seen which way the wind was blowing and had saved himself. Dmitry had not collapsed because Adrian had attacked him. He had collapsed because the world he had built on lies was a house of cards, and Alara had just taught Adrian how to blow on it. He was located not in a palace, but in a gilded cage, his performance of power ending in the most banal of circumstances: handcuffs and jurisdictional paperwork. Adrian felt no triumph, only a profound, weary relief. He looked at Alara. Her eyes were closed. She looked like she was sleeping or praying. He made one last call to Silas Croft. "Is it done?" "Dmitry is in custody," Croft confirmed. "Morozov is fighting extradition, but he won't win. The empire is yours again, Adrian. What's your first order?" Adrian looked at Alara, her face peaceful in the first light of dawn. "My first order," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "is to find the quietest place in Venice and let my partner get some sleep. She's earned it." The weeks that followed were a blur of procedural maneuvering. Lawyers, regulators, and diplomats descended upon the wreckage of Dimitri's betrayal, picking through the pieces. The institutional restoration was slow, methodical, and, thanks to Alara's meticulous record-keeping, ultimately successful. The innocent were protected. The small investors and partners whose assets Dmitry had gambled with were made whole, their funds secured in trusts that Alara had designed. The wavering allies, now firm, returned to the fold, their respect for Adrian transformed. They no longer saw him as a commander to be feared, but as a leader who had earned his place through a painful and public reckoning. Adrian, for his part, was a changed man. He moved through the process with a quiet humility that surprised everyone. He listened more than he spoke. He delegated authority, not as a tactic, but as a genuine recognition of others' expertise. He dismantled the fortress he had built, replacing walls with bridges. His new refrain, repeated in every meeting, was, "Attention is the only currency that matters. Let's make sure we are spending it wisely." But there was one final piece of restoration that needed to be done. It was Alara who insisted on it. "You erased me in a room full of your peers," she said to him one evening, as they looked out over the Grand Canal from the balcony of the small palazzo they had rented. It was not an accusation, it was a statement of fact. "You cannot undo that, but you can correct the record, in the same room, in front of the same people." And so, 3 months after the night on the Ponte degli Scalzi, Adrian stood once again at the lectern in the grand ballroom of the Black Swan Council's annual summit. The room was the same. The faces were the same. But the man was different. He had no notes, no prepared speech. He looked out at the assembled crowd, the titans of finance and industry, the men he had once sought to dominate. "Good evening," he began, his voice clear and steady. "3 months ago, I stood at this podium and I presented a strategy for our collective future. I spoke of my vision, my foresight, my design. I used the word I 17 times. I have counted. It was a bravura performance of an arrogance so profound it nearly destroyed us all." A murmur went through the room. "I am not here tonight to talk about strategy," he continued. "I am here to talk about a mistake. I spoke of building a fortress, but the foundation I was building on was not my own. The integrity, the trust, and the intelligence that held our world together did not come from me. It came from a woman whose name I failed to mention. A woman I presented as a functionary, a background player, when in fact, she was the architect, the engineer, and the moral center of the entire structure." He paused, his eyes scanning the room until he found her. She was standing in the same place as before, by the shadowed archway. But this time, she was not invisible. She was wearing a simple, elegant white dress, and the light seemed to find her. Every eye in the room followed his gaze. "Her name is Alara Petrescu," Adrian said, his voice ringing with a conviction that was more powerful than any command he had ever given. "For 7 years, she was the signal, and I was just the speaker. She paid attention when I was distracted by ambition. She honored trust when I was obsessed with control. She protected the innocent when I was prepared to sacrifice them for profit. She saw the truth when I saw only numbers. The empire you thought was mine was, in fact, built on the bedrock of her character." He turned to face her directly, speaking only to her now. "I cannot undo the erasure, but I can correct the record. I am not the leader of this organization. We are. From this day forward, no decision will be made, no strategy will be implemented, no contract will be signed without her full partnership and consent. She is not my second in command. She is my equal." He stepped away from the lectern. The silence in the room was absolute. A silence of shock, of respect, of a paradigm shifting. Then, the old man from Geneva began to clap. Slowly at first, then with more force. Then others joined in, until the entire room was filled with applause. It was not for him, Adrian knew. It was for her. And for the truth, finally spoken aloud. The reconciliation was not a fairy tale ending. It was not a sudden burst of forgiveness. It was conditional, pragmatic, and unsentimental. It was, in other words, built by Alara. This is not a victory, she told him later that night, as they walked in the cool air of the palazzo's garden. It is a starting line. I understand, he said. No, you don't, she countered, stopping to face him. Not yet. A public speech is a gesture, a beautiful gesture, but a gesture nonetheless. I am not interested in gestures anymore. I am interested in evidence, in patterns of behavior over time. She laid out her terms. They were not the terms of a lover, but of a master builder inspecting a foundation. For the next year, we worked together, as partners. You will continue to listen. You will continue to learn. You will cede control not just when it is convenient, but when it is difficult. You will prove, through 1,000 small actions, that this change is real and not just a reaction to a crisis. And after a year, he asked? After a year, we will assess, she said. We will see what we have built, or what we have failed to build. And then I will decide if I am staying. It was the hardest bargain of his life. Not for a company, not for a contract, but for a chance. A chance to prove that he was not the man he had been. The ending, when it came, was not an ending at all. It was a quiet Tuesday morning, a year and a day after the speech at the summit. They were in his old office, now their office. The severe, masculine furniture had been replaced with pieces that were both elegant and comfortable. The single, imposing desk was gone, replaced by a large, round table in the center of the room where they worked side by side. Adrian was reviewing a proposal for a new clean energy fund. He had doubts. The numbers were optimistic, the timeline aggressive. The old Adrian would have killed it with a single dismissive sentence. The new Adrian turned to his partner. Alara, he said, I need your eyes on this. I see the risk, but I have a feeling you will see the opportunity. She looked up from her own work, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. She took the proposal from him, her fingers brushing his. Of course, Adrian, she said. Let's look at it together. It was not a declaration of love. It was not a promise of forever. It was something far more rare and precious. It was trust. Earned. Conditional. Real. He looked at her, bent over the documents, her brow furrowed in concentration, the full force of her attention brought to bear on the problem. He remembered the central, painful lesson of his long journey back to this room. You can own a person's time, but you can never own their attention. He no longer wanted to own anything. He was content, for the first time in his life, simply to share. The work had begun. They were building something new.